next generation, just to see how people do it differently, you know, the different story times. We learn from each other.
All right.
Jessica, can I ask you a quick question?
Answer.
Okay, so, I was gonna say, last week we talked about tomatoes
Mhm.
and the seeds. Did you say, is it not good to eat the seeds?
No, don't eat the seeds and don't eat the skin. That's where the most anti-nutrients are in.
Okay.
If you examine what a lot of people do in Central America and South America, how they process eggplants. See, and that's my biggest thing with eggplants is all the nutrition is in the skin. And so, you know, technically you're not supposed to eat the skin because of the anti-nutrients in there. And so, you know, when it comes to tomatoes, ignore the skin, ignore the seeds. Get the juice with the seeds, that whole liquid around it. You can put that in water and let it ferment for a couple days and it'll separate from the seeds.
Okay.
And so that's how you save the seeds. And then same with tomatillos, same with eggplants, same with peppers. You don't want to eat the skin.
And the anti-nutrients pretty much just take away all the good stuff you'd be getting from the regular tomato, is that what it means?
What it does is a lot of the anti-nutrients bind to the other vitamins and minerals. And they bind to it, like, so your oxalic acid that's in a lot of greens, it binds to calcium. So if you add more calcium to a dish, you're taking away the oxalate's ability to reduce the nutrients you're consuming. And so the oxalates have to bind the calcium, and that in turn, it reduces how much calcium you absorb by preventing it from being absorbed.
Gotcha.
And so, yeah, you definitely want to limit the amount of anti-nutrients. The best way to do it is boiling your greens. No more salads. Salads are gone. Yeah, salads are gone. If we were talking long-term nutrition and being safe, right, salads are gone. Fine. And so you don't want salads. You want to boil them. You know, Popeye can of spinach. You know, collard greens. You want to boil.
Can you saute or no?
You can saute in water.
Okay.
So you're not really sauteing it.
Right.
It's the water breaks down the oxalates.
Okay. Okay, good to know.
And so that's one of the biggest things. The water breaks it down. If you're doing something like beans, sprouting them. And so there are anti-nutrients in the skin of the beans. That's why a lot of times if you see people prepare cowpeas in Africa, they will soak them and then they will rub the skins off the beans and take them out. The cowpeas and take them out, yeah. And so that gets rid of the anti-nutrients, but also some of the nutrients. So it's like you have to find a balance in there, you know. So that's like mung beans, right? Mung beans are nice. I like them. I can sprout those and eat them raw. And so by sprouting them and eating them raw, I can obtain those nutrients without having to sacrifice them by boiling or removing the skins.
Very, thank you.
No problem. All right, so welcome to the third and final class. Again, my name is Jessic. The platform I'm teaching from is Generational Gardening. The goal of this is to give the most amount of information in a format that it can be easily replicated and passed on to other people as well as descendants. And so today is our third and final class. We're going to talk about genetics and design. So there's going to be a lot of really big things. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to challenge the information I'm giving you. This is one of those topics that, you know, we got to kind of tackle head on. And especially because this first topic's a little bit big, but it's happening right now with all of our plants. And so this first topic we're talking about is extinction. And so without new beginnings, everything eventually comes to an end. The biggest sign of the pathway of extinction for a plant is inbreeding depression. Now, there are other methods like disease, overharvesting, as far as different types of extinction things. Overhunting, you know, considering animals and stuff, environmental or climate change. Global warming can cause a lot of extinction for plants and animals. Global cooling is even more deadly. As gardeners, farmers, homesteaders, and lovers of plant life, it is our responsibility to steward our land and our land races properly. The biggest threat we face as stewards is environmental disease pests and inbreeding. Inbreeding is the gasoline to the other potential problems like pests and disease. Without proper genetic diversity, our land races would die out. Before we can go talking about how to fix this, we have to define our standards. As we define these, we'll be jumping around a little bit. This is a really big topic. So that's why if you have any questions, ask. So one of the biggest things that we face, example, there are some farmers in western Kansas. They grew seed that came from a commercial seed company. They did not get a crop. They grew corn seed from my buddy's farm, who has been gathering genetics for the past 50 years and has over 90 cultivars in one land race. Within 7 inches of rain, it grew a full 7 to 10 inch cob on all of them. And so with enough variety of genetics, you can get corn to grow in 3 inches of rain, and that's it. When normally you'd have to keep watering. And so having diverse genetics can overcome limitations that are associated with different crops. So the first thing we're going to define as our parameters of the class, we're going to define what heirloom is for this class. So an heirloom is a plant variety that has been passed down from generation to generation. Modern heirlooms only have to be 20 years old by modern day standards. And it sounds crazy, right? You're talking about something traditional passed through the ages. It only has to be 20 years old. And the reason why is inbreeding has destroyed so many heirlooms in the past 30 years. And then they're also doing GMO, which is taken away from what people are growing. So either people stop growing it or it's inbreeding practices. A land race. A land race is a plant variety that has been locally adapted over time and that is genetically diverse. And then the next one is a breeding population. And that is a group of varieties that are crossed to create a new cultivar. And then the last one is a Grex. A Grex is a group of unrelated and unmixed cultivars. That will be crossed and selected. All right. And so when it comes to some of the, so I'm part of I'm a seed steward for a company called Going to Seed. It is a national seed genetic nonprofit. You can get seeds from there at donation. And what they do is they take seeds from all around the United States, and they have a seed steward such as myself grow them And then I take the seeds and I would send them back to be distributed amongst the entire nation. And so this is at donation only. And so when all the seeds from all around the United States comes in, they start out as a Grex. They're unrelated. Some can be from the Southwest, some can be from the Northwest, Northeast, Canada. They come as unrelated, unmixed genetics. And that is a Grex. As soon as you take, so like if you were to create a Grex, right? You'd go to like Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds and get a bunch of different seeds and you would mix them. When they cross their genetics, they go from a Grex to a breeding population. And so when the things are not mixed yet, they're a Grex. They're all unique. As soon as you breed them together, you cross them, they become a breeding population, which means they express the genetics of most of the varieties you just mixed. Okay? And then I would send that in, and people would order it, and they would grow it, and as soon as they grow it, it starts to become and adapt into a land race. So breeding population is a mix of genetics. Let's say I have a friend in Texas, right? It's a lot hotter than up here. He grows some of my breeding populations. Not all the genetics are going to make it. So the ones that remain will adapt into a land race. Now, if he continues breeding that, eventually he can pull out genetics that become an heirloom. And so heirloom crops and varieties are inbred. And a lot of people love heirloom crops and varieties. I do. I spend so much money on seeds. Okay, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars, probably thousands on seeds for a little plot. I study all different types of heirlooms. It doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of your heirloom seeds are inbred. And even though they are great and phenomenal, and who doesn't love an heirloom tomato, the lack of genetic diversity that they have makes them more susceptible to pests and disease. And with environmental changes nowadays, it's harder for the heirloom crops to keep up with your traditional crops that a farmer may farm for a grocery store. And so because of that, a lot of heirlooms are dying out. And so one of the best ways to rescue the heirloom varieties is to mix them. And as you mix them, the genetics start to reverse. It starts with a Grex, really, but it's technically a Grex when you mix them. But it quickly goes down to a land race. And so if I took seed and I grew them and you grew them and all of us grew them, right? And we grew them, even if in small amounts, we grew these seeds in a land area, we could blend those and that would technically be a land race. And so there are companies here in Kansas City that do sell land race crops ready to go. Buffalo Seed Company is one of them. Matthew does a really good job at having locally adapted land races ready to go that are genetically diverse. Having that variation is important for plants. And so I'm going to go through a little bit how many plants you need for the breeding, like how many plants you should grow, and ways to combat not having enough space. Because some plants, like corn, you need a lot of corn in order to preserve the genetics, because they cross out at a 100% rate. And so, I'm not saying heirlooms are not good or worth growing, they're just inbred. And that's the nature of the game we have right now with our evolving environment and the pressures that we have with new pests coming up every day. There's a new pest that just came out for wheat. When you monocrop, you're forcing bugs and insects to adapt to that monocrop. And so we're finding more and more pests that are coming from soybeans and wheat. There's a new one for soybeans. And so it's going to be harder because that's a really big commodity crop, or a really big food crop for here in America. We do a lot of corn, we do a lot of soybeans. And so So genetic diversity is important. It's needed for the long haul. When we discuss how to combat this, I do not want you. When we discuss how to combat this, I don't want you using heirlooms, right? When we go through this, if you go to the store or you go online and you buy an heirloom, when you're planting it, try to mix it with another crop. Now, like I like pole beans, right? And I'm growing pole beans this year. And I like black beans because of the antioxidant profile. And so what I did to combat that is I got 3 different varieties of black beans. One of them is a green bean, one of them is a dual purpose, and one of them is a dry bean. And as the bees try to go to each flower, right, the beans will cross up to a 5% rate. And so eventually the beans will start crossing. And by crossing with the 3 different varieties that I have, it'll create a little bit more genetic diversity within the beans themselves while still remaining black beans. And so that's how I combat what's happening with our heirloom plants. And
So whenever you're saying they cross each other, so the black bean can taste like a pole bean? Is that?
oh, so the pole is the method on how the plant grows, and the black bean is what it produces. So I have 3 different cultivars that produce a black bean.
Oh.
And they're all 3 are pole varieties, so I'd have to make a trellis for them to climb up, or I would plant dent corn and they'll climb up the dent corn or sorghum. And so when their beans are dry, they're black beans, and that black beans have from last class, the black beans they have anthocyanins, and so that's really important in our diet nowadays because the standard American diet is pretty much void of a lot of specific nutrients. Yeah, and it's really bad for people in my generation because I'm 30 years old and people my age get cancer right now, and so it's really important to bring that nutrition back into food. And so we've gotten used to having so much processed food and stripping the nutrients from it that it's really causing these huge problems for people younger and younger. And you're having people in their late 20s, early 30s starting to have these diseases and cancers that normally you'd expect, later on in life. And it's really unfortunate. So by adding and growing plants that have key nutrients is important. And by making them genetically diverse, they can handle the stress of the future. And so that's just the main point I want to stress is that I can grow Cherokee Trail of Tears, and it's pretty genetically diverse. But I added to that a it's a Kentucky Wonder black bean variety, which is an heirloom. So I added that to that mix, and then I added another one from Oaxacan variety from central southern Mexico. There's one that grows really well down there, and it's a black bean as well, and a pole variety. And so by mixing those 3, eventually the bees will cross.
Okay, that's where I was getting. You mix those 3,
Yeah.
so then you will kind of flavor or aid the flavor mixed in with each other.
Yeah, it'll have the same effect. It grows exactly the same. It has the same bean at the end, but they harvest at different points. So eventually they'll start to blend on when they're ready for harvest. And that's that genetic diversity,
Okay.
right? Adding those genetics to it.
I'm with it.
Yeah. Like I said, this is a big topic, right? So it's a lot. Feel free to ask questions. Ma'am, did you have a question? Okay. Okay, so you can mix a few heirlooms into a Grex, and then by breeding them, they become a landrace. The genetics will stabilize, and you want plants that are not cookie cutter, right? And this applies to animals too. So where I learned this from is a man named Joseph Lofthouse, and Joseph Lofthouse has a book called Landrace Gardening, and in it he explains how in his zone, in Zone 5 in Utah in the mountains, he has basically 100 days to grow. And that's it. And he wanted to grow squash. And so what Joseph Lofthouse did is he bought heirloom seeds from all over the country. And he grew them all. And eventually one plant produced fruit. And he saved the seed from that fruit from that squash and planted it the next year, and instead of just getting 1 squash, he got 12 squash. And he noticed that the more genetically diverse his crops became, the more that they adapted to his climate. And so he really, this is 12 years ago that he first started doing this, so he's really pioneering, again, it's Landrace Gardening by Joseph Lofthouse. He's really pioneering blending genetics, which goes against what every heirloom seed steward is saying, every person who has, these are my, silkies, and this is my other chicken, and have all these breeds, right? He's saying blend the genetics, it'll create a better a landrace cultivar or a landrace animal that can survive different climates and altitudes. And if it's a drought heavy this year, the genetics will allow you to survive for that where normally you wouldn't. And so, okay, so think about a butternut squash, right? The uniform shape. Now imagine adding like a Seminole pumpkin to that. So now you have a plant that can produce from a butternut squash to a pumpkin and every mixed shape in between. That little difference alone can be the difference between your crop surviving and failing, just through those genetics. So not everything has to change the flavor. A lot of things you just change the shape or when the harvest is ready. And that can be enough adding genetics to your crops that can handle, let's say it was a really heavy rain, almost a monsoon. So you got way too much water and then you had a drought. Having diverse genetics will allow your plants to survive that, which means that you're going to have food at the end of this season. And that's what's important, is being able to feed your family, yourself, and your friends. I talked about the pole beans. So all the color will be the same. The difference in the pole beans will be the pod shapes, the pod colors, and the harvest time, and the bean shape. So the beans will still grow on a trellis. They'll still have a black pigment, a dark purple to black pigment, but they're going to have different shapes, different sizes. They're going to have different pod colors, and just that genetic diversity alone will help them survive different environments. And this is how I choose to express genetic diversity while staying within the parameters that I need for nutrition. It's really hard to sit here and it's hard to get the nutrition you need from the crops and have it genetically diverse. You have to have a middle ground for it. Now mind you, I can have corn of every different color, and I do. I have corn that's mixed. I have shades of pink, purple, orange, brown, blue, purple, red, and black in my corn. For a minute there, I was going to breed it just red because I wanted red, but I get red from the lycopene I get from my peppers, I get from my tomatoes, and I get from my watermelon. And that covers, I can always dry my watermelons I can always dry my watermelons, I can can my tomatoes, and I can dry my peppers. And that will allow me to have that lycopene throughout the year. And then if I want the darker colors, I have black beans for that. And then I also have a red bean. Now beans don't have the colors through like other crops do. Like a beet is red all the way through, right? Your beans only have the nutrition in the pigment in the skin. And so, if I'm gonna cook food for nutrition, I'm gonna take my beans, I'm gonna soak them overnight. I have to soak them. I really want to jumpstart that germination process, and that's going to help the anti-nutrients. I don't want to dump out my water that I soaked them in. I want to cook them in that. And so by doing that, I'm preserving the most amount of the pigment. Just like the cowpeas that I have. I have all these different varieties of cowpeas, but I'm only going to grow my red cowpeas. And that's because the red pigment's harder to find. A lot of crops that have red pigment, a lot of them are biennials. And so I don't necessarily have a lot of time to grow biennials, and a lot of your tomatoes are harder to grow because they are genetically inbred because of how they reproduce. And so when I look at the crops, and I look at the nutrition that's lacking in the standard American diet, it really makes me focus on certain crops and the colors I want to breed. And because of that, it limits me. You know, like Joseph Lofthouse, his beans have every single color, right? They're super colorful, you know? And so my approach and his approach are a little different on that. At the same time, you could take my beans and then mix a little bit in with your diverse landrace crop, and that's going to boost the genetics of your crop because my crops have certain genetics with them, so that if you're trading seeds with people, you're constantly rotating genetics. So your crops are always going to be a little bit more, your plants are going to be stronger because of the genetic diversity. And so, and I see this a lot with my buddy Dave. For his plants, Dave Christensen, he breeds Painted Mountain up in Montana, and it can survive just about anywhere. And he separates his colors when he breeds his plants. So he has every single shade you can think of color for his corn, and he separates in each field by color, so he can have the strongest pigments, and then he mixes them together, and it sort of forms a Grex, but it's the genetics are from the same land race, but he's really creating a Grex, and then he's shipping that out, and so the plants breed really well. They do really well in horrible conditions, and the pigments are really bright. The reds are bright reds, you know, fire truck red, and it's just. The colors on them are beautiful, and it has so much nutrition in there because he keeps them separate a little bit, but still grows enough to make them genetically diverse. And then he blends them and sends them to other people. And so, you know, when I look at now mind you can grow every color you want for beans. You don't have to do what I'm doing. But when I look at the different crops I'm growing, I kind of make them genetically diverse and have them focus on a key nutrient. So that way, when I share with someone, it's the best nutrients that I can grow with those genetics. And I really want to be able to be like, okay, here's a red bean, right, that has a really vibrant red color. So that way, when someone mixes that in with their big, you know, rainbow corn or rainbow bean, you know, Grex or landrace they're doing, they can have some really good antioxidant profiles mixed in with their food. And so that's why I breed a little bit different. But if you're looking for just diversity, you can mix any color bean you want, any color corn you want. It'll breed. If you're trying to do for key nutrition, it's going to be a little bit harder. And so don't think about that. Oh, I have to grow this one or that one. Just try to have the colors in there. And last week we talked more about the colors. You know, just the colors, what they represent, the antioxidant profiles in them. And the main thing is to have a diverse, colorful food supply. Okay, now we're going to talk about the minimum viable population, or MVP. Now we're going to get into some heavy stuff. So the minimum viable population. Is anyone here familiar with the rule of extinction? So for humans, for the rule of extinction, we need 50 unrelated humans to survive less than 20 generations. We need 500 unrelated humans to survive over 20 generations. And we need 5,000 to survive long-term against any types of disease or natural disaster or anything that may come our way. And so this is a rule of extinction, a theory. It's something that I studied heavily because it's true for all mammals. As you know, mammals, you know, our DNA gets really, it destroys really easy whenever there's inbreeding that goes on. And so, it's really important that, we make sure that things are genetically diverse. Luckily for us, fowl, chicken, ducks, all that, don't have to follow that 5,500, 5,000 rule, okay? And even better, plants don't have to follow it either as much. Now there is a certain number we have to do to keep that genetic integrity, but it's not as extreme as a 50, 500, 5,000. Imagine having to grow 5,000 corn plants just to have corn. That'd be pretty hard. I couldn't do that. I don't have the space for it. And so, luckily there's different numbers that we can grow to maintain, and there's different numbers we can grow to, if we're going to seed share, which I recommend everyone. There's a lot of local seed swaps coming on. I know there's one going on in January. I'm bringing tons of genetics for that. I can get information at the end of our class. I can give the information for it, but I'm bringing in so many genetics over there. Genetics from Kenya, Africa, all throughout, from Nigeria, Uganda, all sorts of stuff. I have stuff from all over. Like I said, I spend a lot of money on seeds. And so when we look at chicken or other domesticated fowls, so chicken, we're looking at 15 for under 20 generations, 75 for over 20 generations, and 500 for the long haul. And so when it comes to chickens, now that may seem like a lot, but 50, 500, 5,000 is a lot less than humans need. And so if you're just trying to have a little backyard flock to get you some eggs for the next 20 years, or however many generations they're going to have, under 20 generations, 15 chickens is fine, Got a little tiny coop, maybe got 1 or 2 roosters. It's recommended 3 roosters, but not all roosters are equal. I like Icelandic chickens because they're a little bit more genetically diverse. They have funny little hairstyles, and the males are a little bit easier to keep together. Once they establish an order, the Icelandic chickens are very, they have a pecking order, and the roosters don't fight as much after that. So you can easily have 4 or 5 males in a flock, maybe even more. And so birds are not bound to the same level of genetic degradation like mammals are. So the ratio we should look at would be three males to 12 females, 10 males to 65 females, and 60 males to 440 females. Now, again, these are just the numbers, right? I couldn't do that even if I had 5 acres. That's too much, So where this really draws its, I would say its shining point is community. Right? And so, I'm starting with it here, I'm gonna lead it into plants. It's really important. If I have 5 chickens, you have 5 chickens, everyone has 5 chickens, you can pass around the genetics from each generation. So now because it's a community, now you can maintain for over 20 generations because you have access to a larger number. And so by having that community, which is really important, you can build up how much or how many animals you have access to. And so now we're going to go, I wanted to add chicken in there because it's really important. Chickens they're the first homestead animal, I feel. People go for chickens. You can use quail. Now if you did quail, I can fit 75 quail just in this space here. So quail are the size of, basically that, a softball. And you can have 20 quail in a 3 foot by 1.5 foot cage, and they'll do just fine. And so, yeah, I have one at home. He does great. And so quail are really nice because they cannot survive in wild on their own. They're 100% domesticated, and their eggs are really tiny, right? Little tiny eggs. They do great in soups and stuff. And so you can actually, it's feasible to have genetic diversity within quail, and not have it take up a whole space. And so we can talk about that, forever. I can talk about quail forever. I went to a quail farm earlier this year, one of the largest in North America, and did a bunch of experiments there, and they got about 8,000 quail, so probably just in the size of the little area out there, the big floor, that's how big the little area was, and 7,000 to 8,000 quail, they output 1 million eggs a year. So quail can easily output 320 eggs in a single year. And so now let's go to plants. If we are looking at self-pollinating, we go ahead and erase this right here. Self-pollinating we're looking at 10, 50, 300. So this is peppers, tomatoes, beans, peas, lentils, chickpea, amaranth. Amaranth is self-pollinating. Wheat is self-pollinating. And so this covers a variety of crops. Now, self-pollinating, they don't cross very readily. Tomatoes are at 5%, beans are at 5%, cowpeas are at 10%, peppers are at 10%. Your peas are at 10%. Amaranth is at 10 to 20%. It's wind pollinated, it's self-pollinated, and wind is the method it carries over. So amaranth's about 20-25%, I'd say. It will breed next to each other, but it's mostly self-pollinating. As well as are a lot of plants in the Chenostapodium family. So your quinoa is self-pollinating as well, but it also can spread by wind. And so all you need is 10 plants, and that is for the expression of genetics. So, and that's going to go into when we're kind of building our plots and we're having all these plants, all the fun stuff. We are going to use this method to show what plants you can grow. We're going to combine it all together. And so, tomatoes, 10 plants. And the reason why I suggest landrace over heirloom is because you'd have to have 10 plants of every single heirloom you grow. Or you can combine them into a landrace, and you can have those genetics be expressed in that landrace. So when you mix 2 heirloom crops together, you are not destroying the heirloom. You are combining the genetics. So it's a lot different than people say you're ruining the heirloom, and that's not true. You're saving the genetics. You can always pull those genetics back out again. Now, cross-pollinating is going to be a little bit more. And we're looking at 30, 150, and 1,000. Okra, tomatillos, corn, pumpkins, squash, watermelon, Oof. There's a person I watched, his name is David the Good, and he had one Seminole pumpkin, and it grew out of his compost pile, and it took over his entire yard. He had like 0.3 acres, and it just overran all of it, all because the pumpkin seed grew out of his compost. And so to think about, how one plant can occupy 30 square feet, and you need 30 of those. It's a lot. Luckily, there's ways to go about it. Trust me. I like watermelon and I like butternut squash, so I found ways that I can grow 30 in a smaller space. And so, now these numbers seem daunting. Just remember, if we focus on land races, that can be plants adapted within a 50 or 100 mile radius. And so, if I have 10 plants, and let's say all of us grow 10 plants, right? That's not 30, it's 10. If we exchange seeds with each other at a 30% rate, we can meet that minimum. So by seed swapping in your community total can be less. Well, your community total can match the numbers, and you can grow less. So that's the beautiful thing about seed swapping. Going to these local seed swaps is as long as you're within 50 to 100 miles, they are still considered a land race. And so I know Matthew from Buffalo Seed, he has a map on his website, and his plants are good all the way to get to Indiana, it looks like, and it's because that whole zone, it shows it from Colorado to almost to the border of Illinois and Indiana. His plants are bred for that zone. And so as you sit here and think about, oh man, I have to have all these different cultivars and varieties, by seed sharing and having multiple people come together and growing crops, you can easily meet these numbers. And so, if I grow, 2 bean plants, and everyone in here grows 2 bean plants, we all have the genetics for 10. And so I recommend growing these self-pollinating. I recommend growing these at least the minimum. Now with this, you don't have to grow that if you don't want to. But I really recommend growing at least 10 self-pollinating and 30 cross-pollinated if you can. Now it's going to be harder with the bigger crops, but things like carrots are cross-pollinating, and one 10-foot row, or probably 2 10-foot rows, you could definitely have 30 carrots. And so that's very feasible in a smaller space. Carrots, radish, those are very feasible. And so, okay, now let's say, I'm gonna repeat the information I just gave because I have it written down. Let's say you only have the capacity to grow 30 crossing plants a year, but your seed swapping community has access to over 10,000 plants. You want to add 20 to 30% new seed every year. So you want to keep genetic, you want to save seed from all of them, all 30 plants you're growing. You want to take out 20 to 30%, give that away, take in 20 to 30% every year, and then on the every 5th year, take half your genetics, swap them out, bring in some new genetics. And if you do that, you can grow a small number like these and have genetic diversity in your community. The most important thing of all this plant breeding is to let weak plants die. Don't baby those plants. This will strengthen the gene pool. And I wish I could get some slides from Going to Seed, because they have a demonstration where they show 2 potato plants. And one is strong and the other one, and potatoes is self-cloning. You have one that's strong and the other one is weak, infested by bugs and pests, and is being destroyed. And it's because of the genetics. And so, by plants that are weaker, right? Even my buddy Dave, he'll plant, you know how we talk about Funguza, we plant 3 seeds, it grows into 2 plants, and each of them is 2 feet apart. He does whole rows of his corn, and he'll sit there and he'll take out 9 out of 12 plants. He'll pick them out. He only allows the strongest ones to remain. And by doing so, his corn can grow in 3 inches of rain, which is unheard of. So he grows in the Montana mountains in 3 inches of rain. And so you have to let the weaker plants go away. All right. So let's talk about bees. Who likes bees? I love bees. I love bees. Bees are great, right? My aunt, she has honeybees, you know. You know, she tells me to look after my little cousins whenever they're out collecting nectar. Honeybees are great, fantastic in producing. But they're not the bees that I want, though. And so we're going to talk about plant breeding. I labeled this chapter Birds and the Bees, Plant Edition, being adults about it. And so plants breed by 3 main ways. And those 3 main ways are self-pollination, which we talked about a little bit ago. You got the numbers for it. And self-pollination is a type of pollination that both male and female parts on the same flower, they can still cross-pollinate though. And they cross-pollinate at 0.01 through 10%. And these are, you know, tomatoes, peppers, beans, amaranth. So, peppers, beans, tomatoes, they all used to, well, I don't know so much about beans, but peppers and tomatoes, they used to cross. Every generation they used to cross. They're originally from South America. As they went through up into Central America, they did not; those plants no longer had the bee that was required to pollinate, to spread the pollen. So those plants had to adapt to become from cross-pollinating to self-pollinating. And that's one of the things that Joseph Lofthouse has created. He calls it his promiscuous pollination of tomatoes, and he bred wild tomatoes with domestic tomatoes, and he created a crossing tomato. And so it creates a new cultivar every year, but it has to cross, like tomatillos. It's no longer self-pollinating. And then to response to that, with the Dwarf Tomato Project, they're creating dwarf tomatoes with potato leaves, they're called potato leaf tomatoes, and their anthers, their male part is sticking out a little bit, allowing the plants to be cross-pollinated, as well as still self-pollinating. So you got some people trying to save tomatoes. Again, I don't know if it's public knowledge, but 100 years ago we had 26 different species of tomatoes. Now we have 8. So we've lost 18 varieties or species of tomatoes in the past 100 years. And that's from people stopped growing them. That's from climate, and as well as a focus of GMO crops. So we're losing our genetics. So it's really important that you save seed. The next is cross-pollination. And it produces one aspect of breeding it needs another plant to be complete. So we're looking at corn, squash, your brassicas, okra, melons. Something, when I was researching this stuff a few weeks ago, I was like, man, I it seems like a lot to have, 50 different squash plants, right? Like, how am I ever going to maintain genetic diversity? And I found a lot of dwarf varieties, which is really cool. So I can, all of your vining crops that sprawl, they have dwarf varieties. They have watermelon plants that are 2 feet long. So you can have, in this little patch here, you can have, 20 different watermelon plants. And you can have that genetic diversity. So it's possible. But I was just wondering a little bit more about it, right? Come to find out, some squash and watermelon varieties can, in one plant, can contain the DNA of up to 5 different male flowers. So as your little mason bees are going from flower to flower, they can pollinate one female flower with the DNA of 5 different male flowers. So that tactic alone for the plants allows them to maintain genetic diversity, that you can have 6 different plants' DNA in one fruit. And that's really cool, because it allows, if something were to happen, like the vine borers come and massacre your whole field, and if you have plants that survive, they can still maintain a level of genetic diversity. That means potentially in 5 different melons, you could have up to 30 different plants' DNA in there. And so it allows for if anything were to happen, it allows them to carry those genetics over more. And then the last one is cloning. This one's going out. And cloning is done by only 3 different plants that we normally have, or 4 different plants. And that is potatoes, sweet potatoes, garlic, and sunroot / Jerusalem artichoke. And I hate that method. It's horrible. So there is a way you can produce seed from garlic. You have to use a soft neck garlic, and you have to hand pick the bulbils off of it. So as your garlic tries to go to seed, it'll produce little bulbils, and you have to pick them off by hand to expose the flowers, which then can be pollinated by insects. So there is a way to produce true seed from garlic, and once you produce true seed, it will continue to produce true seed. They do have true seed potatoes. It takes about 10 months to grow. But you can produce potatoes from true seed. You just have to start them indoors like November. Sweet potato, you can get, some people have sweet potato produce true seed. It's a lot more rare to find. And then sunroot, or Jerusalem artichoke, really good, big homesteading prepper food. Contains a lot of inulin, so you can ferment it really well. It's pretty healthy. It's a nice, beautiful, tall, skinny sunflower looking thing, and it's part of the daisy family. And right, I want to say daisy family. Maybe I'm getting confused. I don't think it's daisy family. Sorry, you can cross them with Maximilian sunflowers. So they can cross genetically, and you can cross that with they're part of the sunflower family, because you can cross them. You can cross Maximilians with Jerusalem artichoke, and then cross that with a standard sunflower to create a perennial sunflower. That's how they do that. But they only produce true seed if you have to plant them by tuber, and they only produce true seed if you have different plants that are unrelated, just like pawpaws. Pawpaws have runners. At Wyandotte County Lake, there's tons of pawpaws out there. I love them. I love pawpaws. They're great. They only produce pawpaws if there's different separate trees nearby. So the trees produce runners, and they will not breed. And so it's really important that it makes it hard, because people who sell sunroots, they're all selling clones, and so you have to buy from like some person over on the East Coast and some person on the West Coast, and you hope that they're genetically unrelated. Because there's so many clones being moved around. Like all the potatoes are clones. The only way to get true potato is to import them from South America or to grow them from seed. And so that's why I really don't like cloning, because it limits the genetic expression of the plants. And if there's a big disease, let's say there's a horrible disease that targets potatoes, we can kiss our potato operation goodbye. You know, it just makes it too susceptible for any kind of biological warfare that may happen in the future, or any diseases that might be released. So I really like the cross-pollinating, but if you're not careful, you can start to inbreed quickly. So I like having a little bit mix of both. You know, there's grain crops that are self-pollinating, as well as grain crops that are cross-pollinating. Having a healthy blend to rely on is important. And there's two methods of delivery. The first method of delivery is Amazon. I'm joking. So wind pollination is the first method of delivery. And you'll see that more on like wheat. Wheat is self-pollinating, but also wind pollinating. So if there's nothing, if it doesn't get any new DNA, it will breed with itself. But if there's wind, it will take on new DNA. Amaranth is also self-pollinating, but wind pollinating. And so corn is wind pollinating. So examples, uses the wind to carry pollen from plant to plant. Sorghum, wheat, spelt, corn, amaranth. The next one is insect pollination. And that one carries pollen from plants to plant by butterfly, moth, bees, wasps, and flies. Keynote, honeybees, love them. I got little cousin honeybees, you know? Not cousin, yeah, cousins, yeah, this man. They search for nectar. So they are not the bees we want for pollinating. Honeybees, they can pollinate. They're not the main ones that your plants need. Mason, carpenter, and bumblebees are the big three. Mason, carpenter, and bumblebees. They're the big players, with mason bees being the MVP. Mason bees are smaller, and they're faster at moving around, and allows them to enter the smaller flowers. So like beans have really small flowers. And so a mason bee will have an easier time crossing your beans. Now, anyone here heard of runner beans? They're like that big, like Painted Lady. So there's a bean variety from Central America, and it's called a runner bean or scarlet runner. And these beans are huge, and they have giant flowers, and they cross at a 30% rate. Your standard common bean can cross with them and create a hybrid. And it creates a bean with a bigger flower, allowing more bees to go in there and cross-pollinate. And so it's not as popular to make a hybrid with it, because your scarlet runners do really good in high humidity, while your common beans do really good in drought. And so you're kind of ruining both pluses, but you're creating a bean that's slightly bigger that can cross easier. And so if you need something that can self-pollinate, and you want it to be able to cross a bit easier, there are legume options that can do so. The only thing is that your grasshoppers will love them, and they will eat every flower. And so I planted about 100 different seeds of scarlet runner, and the grasshoppers did not let a single one turn into a pod. So yes, I'm very upset at my native grasshoppers. Also, you can build houses for the mason bees. So That's one of the big pluses. So not only are they the best pollinator out of all the bees, you can build homes for them. And they're the same homes that ladybugs use and other types of powerful insect predators that we want in our gardens. We want ladybugs, we want certain types of moths, we want these beneficial insects that are gonna help keep pests at bay, aphids at bay, that are gonna help pollinate the crops. And so to make a hive home for the mason bee, you can take a log and you can drill into this log multiple holes anywhere from 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. All over the log. You just want to create all the little holes. And this will give enough space for a mason bee, a place to create a home. And what they'll do is they'll find a hole. In nature, they find holes that insects create. And they go in those holes and they patch and seal. They put larvae inside. So they're not a colony bee like honeybees. They're solitary. And so they'll put their spawn on the inside and they'll seal it over winter. So by taking a log and drilling a bunch of little holes in it, you're drawing them to your property. And that way, when they first emerge in the spring, guess what? They're going to need pollen, and they're right there where your crops are. And so you have some of the best pollinators right there at your home property, pollinating all your crops in springtime where you have low pollination at. And so you could also use, and that will last multiple winters. And so you have multiple uses out of it. You can also use small bamboo and chop bamboo. I'd probably say at like a 4-inch in 4-inch segments, and you can bind them together, build a little shelf for them to rest in. There's different methods, but creating a housing for your mason bees are going to help the pollination of your crops and spreading of genetics. They'll even, I watch them, they'll even go and collect the pollen off the tassels on your corn. And so it kind of helps, if there's low wind, it helps move around the tassels and your corn will still release a little bit of pollen from it. All right, now we're on to a really, really big one. I believe it's the second to last one we have. Yeah. What to select, right? So the most important selection you will make will be what you're gonna. The most important selection you will make will be what you're wanting to grow and how you want it to behave. Are you focused more on fresh herbs and vegetables? Lavender, cilantro, asparagus, tomatoes, summer squash, maybe what you want to focus on. Are you preparing for hard times? Corn, sorghum, beans, cowpeas, melons, butternut squash, sunflower, sesame might be what you want to focus on. Compact and dwarf plants for the most amount of genetic diversity. So by narrowing down what you want to grow, will carry us into how we choose our breed stock. If you save seed every year, which you should be doing, you are plant breeding. So whether you acknowledge it or not, if you're saving seed every year, you are plant breeding. And you should save seed every year. Because your seeds will adapt to how you garden. If you water twice a week, your plants will start to require twice a week watering. If you don't water at all and let the rain water, you dry farm, which we can do in this area. We are in an area where you can dry farm. Your plants will adapt to that every generation. And so you want to save your seeds, and by saving your seeds, you are plant breeding. Because your plants are adapting to how you garden, how you farm, how you interact with them. If you play Mozart in the morning, the plants will adapt to that. You know, there's a study that bird chirping helps corn grow better. And so, you know, how you interact with your plants determines on how they respond. And so the first filter we need to put on is, are we going to grow cross-pollinating or self-pollinating, right? So self-pollinating, we went over it. You need 10 plants for short term. 10 plants for short term for self-pollinating, and we need 30 plants for long term. And then for the, 10 plants for short term for self, 50 for long term, 30 plants for crossing, and 150 for long term. So if you're not going to trade any seeds with anyone and you're growing corn, you need a minimum of 150 plants. If you're going to be trading seed with people, you can get away with 30 plants. If you're growing tomatoes and you're not going to be sharing seeds with anyone, you can grow 50 tomato plants. It's a lot. It's a lot of tomatoes. You know, you'll have sauce for days. If you're going to be sharing seeds, you can get away with growing 10 plants. As long as every year you trade off probably about 25%. You take a quarter of your seeds and you trade them off and get new seeds every year. And then every 5 years, you exchange for half your genetics. So now we run into our first problem, right? Do we have the space to grow what we want? That's a big question. If your goals are peppers, green beans, tomatoes, eggplants, peas, amaranth, lentils, chickpeas, dry beans, wheat, quinoa, rice, barley, and oats, then you can get away with 10 plants. The minimum of 10 plants will do in a short term of 20 generations. So you're covered for 20 years at the minimum. 20 years. Probably a lot longer than that. You know? And so you're talking about a bean variety. Beans they're self-pollinating. They cross at a 5% rate. So the chances of in 20 years a couple of your bean plants crossing, it's pretty likely. It'll probably happen, thus increasing the life. So if you're growing and wanting to grow, again, peppers, green beans, tomatoes, eggplants, peas, amaranth, lentils, chickpeas, dried beans, wheat, quinoa, rice, barley, and oats, you can get away with 10 plants, and you'll be good for the short term. Or if you're trading seeds. If you're cross-pollinating, then you need a minimum of 30 plants per variety. So if you're growing multiple different ones, you need 30 plants. So that's corn, spinach, beets, rye, squash, cucumber, melon, watermelon, okra, carrots, onions, basil, dill, coriander / cilantro. You need 30 plants just to get by for the next 20 years. Or if you have a community you can share with, you can swap it out and you'll be fine. All right. So last week I went over a chart that talks about companion planting and sun requirements of plants. And so we're going to go back to that list, right, of the most common plants grown in a garden. It doesn't have amaranth on there, even though it's not a plant. But we're going to go through, we're going to separate in multiple categories, and I'll write it on the board, of plants that require, what their pollination requirement is, and what type of sun requirement they have. And this is going to be leading into what our land looks like, how much sun we get in certain areas. So this is where we really get into, these are the puzzle pieces to build a custom planting station at your property. And so the first one is full sun and self-pollinating. And that's going to be tomatoes, peppers, beans, or bush beans, and cowpeas. Next is going to be full sun and cross-pollinating. And that's going to be corn, cucumbers, squash, pumpkin, okra, melons, and tomatillo. Next is full sun cloning, which I do not like, but I mean it's great to grow. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, and sunroot, or Jerusalem artichoke. Next is half sun self-pollinating. We're looking at peas and chickpeas. You could probably throw lentils up here at full sun. Sorry about that. And then we have half sun cross-pollinating. Onion, cabbage, carrot, cauliflower, chard, Swiss chard, beets, broccoli, radish, and turnip. That's a lot. And for the last one is a quarter sun cross-pollination. And we're looking at lettuce and spinach. Sorry, my handwriting got worse the more I got. This is it. This is, aside from the, well, we're about to get in the planting method. This right here is the list that brings everything together. So out of the past 2 weeks of teaching, this list right here is the key, right? And so what this shows is that it breaks down what plants you can plant in what parts of your yard. And so with that, we can design, and I'm going to go through some examples of how to piece together different systems for your yard, your farm, whichever you're going at. I have an urban garden, and so I do urban gardening. I garden 0.10 of an acre. So I have probably less than that. I really don't have a lot of space that I garden at. So for me, getting the maximum amount of crop growth for what I have is really important. And so I believe that by utilizing the requirements as well as how many plants you need, right, will dictate what you can grow. Now, let's say I want to grow corn. Okay, I need at least 30 plants to get by, right? But because I'm going to preserve the genetics, right, I'm growing 150 corn plants. Well, that's going to take up a 10-foot wide by 40-foot long or 35-foot long space. And so that's a huge, that's like half of the land I have really to farm on. And so, or garden with. And so like a vast majority of my space goes to corn. And that's because I'm breeding a new dent corn cultivar. I'm calling it Painted Horse. And it's going to be a dent corn, and it's going to be an Indian style dent corn. So it's going to be on a 4 to 6 foot tall stalk. And it's going to be done probably mid-September. You can kill the plant, and it'll be done, dry. And so genetics I'm using is from an endangered corn variety from Oklahoma called Big Horse Spotted. And then I have a couple varieties, Mandan Bride, as well as Painted Mountain from North Dakota and Montana. I'm mixing all three and making it a dent corn, because dent corns do really well in the Midwest. And so I wanted something that grows really fast, that has a smaller stalk, that produces 1 to 2 long ears, that I could use it for all sorts of things. And so to me, I'm going to be using corn. It requires full sun. I have a spot for it. I really only have 2 spots in my yard, and I planted corn in one of the spots last year, so I have to rotate, right? You got to rotate your crops. And so that leaves me only 1 other spot to grow corn. And so I have another spot where I'm growing spelt. I have a lot of spelt, and spelt is self-pollinating, so it's not going to interfere as much. So I want you to look at this list and think about every time you see cross-pollinating, it's going to take up a large amount of space, right? And so think about the space that you have. Do you have a lot of shaded area? If you have a lot of shaded area, right, do you want to grow half sun or cross or self? Do you want to grow a lot of peas or chickpeas? It's pretty limiting. Around summertime, your pea plants die off. You have a really good harvest at the beginning of the year, and you can have a harvest at the end of the year. But in between, the only thing you can really grow is the half crossings. And so our onion, cabbage, carrots, you can grow those. Chard as well grows all year round. So this is the list. And so, and then I'm going to go in here. We're gonna this right here will narrow down what you can grow. And now we're going to play a little game of Tetris, and I'm going to show different ways to use this list. And so this really is the big takeaway on what you can grow. And if you remember, self, you could get away with 10 plants, and crossing, you can get away with 30 plants. If you remember that, and then every year you share seeds with someone in the community, you'll be good. But you got to share seed. If you're not going to share seed, you got to grow, what, 50 here? What was it? Yeah, 50. Yeah, you have to grow 50 here, 50 self-pollinating, and 150 cross-pollinating if you're not going to share seeds with people. So sharing seed allows you to grow different crops more. Yes?
So the list that you've now displayed, that is within like the companionship, so if you wanted to do, am I correct on assuming that?
No, but I'm gonna give examples of companions. I'm gonna get into that. Yeah, this is the start of everything. I am, we've been cooking a little bit here. I barbecued the beef and I did this and that. Now we're building a plate right now, and so this is going in more of where you can plant stuff, and then it's broken down into how many you have to plant. And so, again, cross-pollinating, 30 or 150. If you're not sharing seed, you need to grow 150 of every single one of these if you're going to have that. That's a lot. Now, of course, let's say half sun, right? Carrots and corn, or carrots and squash, 150 plants is vastly different in what they look like. A squash plant can go 20 feet long, a carrot's about 8 inches. And that's it. So, you can get away with, maybe in half sun areas, you get away with a lot more cross-pollinating plants because a lot of them are smaller. Broccoli plants are pretty big. Cabbage plants get pretty big. Your radishes, not so big. You can do a whole lot, especially they only need half sun, right? So that means if you have a little tree line and only half the day, only really gets the morning sun or the evening sun, you can do a whole line of radish or onion or cauliflower or cabbage or chard. You can get away with that, or carrots. You can get away with that, And so you can grow out some of these crossings. Some of these full sun crosses, they take up a lot of space. Tomatillos, not so much. They're a little bit smaller, but the rest of them, pretty big plants, especially if you're not growing dwarf varieties.
Does tomatoes grow the same as regular tomatoes, your tomato plant?
Yes, but they grow better. Because they cross, they take less time to transplant, and they also they harvest faster. And so, they harvest faster. So I'm choosing to grow tomatillos. So over tomatoes. I have a lot of tomato plants. I'm going to grow them, but I'm choosing to grow tomatillos. And I picked a landrace variety called Queen of Malinaco, and it's it's a Mayan variety from Guatemala. Queen of Malinaco. And this one is a really good variety. It grows like a Roma tomato, and it's hollow on the inside. So it's not. So normally when you cut into a tomatillo, it's a lot of flesh on the inside, and the seeds are buried. Not this one. When you cut it open, the seeds are all together like a pepper, and so you can remove all the seeds at once. So you can process 100 fruit really quickly. So you can do large batch really quick. And they say it's a cross between it's like a tropical tomato. That's what they describe the flavor like. So if I'm growing, I order 900 seeds. So for me, that has to go in full sun, and it's crossing, and I don't know anyone else who's growing it, so I have to grow 150 plants. So now one thing I can do is I can save the genetics, and I don't have to plant everything, or I can share the plant with other people. But that's something that I have to do. Now, of course, the seeds will stay for a couple of years, so I don't have to plant all 900. I can do it in batches, right, and rotate by plants. I can do it that way, the seeds that I'm growing. It just adds more complexity to it, but allows me to grow out only a portion if I only have so much space. But I have to grow 150 tomatillos. That's a lot, and luckily it is a land race, so it's very genetically diverse. There's a few other tomatillos I was thinking about crossing with it, but I really think because it's cross-pollinated and it's a land race variety, a lot of your Central American, they call them heirlooms, they're really not. a lot of your Central American varieties are very diverse. They keep them as a landrace. And so if you get seeds from Central America that are from that region originally, you're gonna have something that's very diverse. This notion of having cookie cutter crops is it's a very old world tradition. You find it a lot in Asia and Europe. When you look at crops from Africa, it's super diverse. A lot of crops from Central America, North America, and South America are very diverse. Only when you look at the old world is there a uniformity. And I understand that, even when you look at chicken breeds, you got 15,000 chicken breeds, they all each look a little different, they're all unique. But it limits the genetics for the long term, unfortunately. And so, any other questions? Anyone else? And so yeah, that's something so for me, right there, just for me, full sun, corn, tomatillo. That's 300 plants I have to grow, just me. That's most of my space. I don't have much room for anything else. And so I'm gonna have to save a lot of seed back and only plant a certain amount. I'm gonna have to plant 30, right? And then I'll have to save seed back and then take seed, right? So let's say I get 1,000 seeds, right? I'm planting, 60 of them, right? They grow, those seeds produce, those plants produce, I get seeds from those plants. I go back to my original pool. I take a handful of that, combine it with those seeds, take some of those seeds out, put it with my pool of seeds now. So I'm using my giant pool of seeds as that transactionary seed exchange. And I'm ordering from someone who has the capacity to grow 500 plants and store the genetics. And I'm ordering from them, and I'm switching out, again, 25% of my seeds I'm exchanging, and I'm adding 25% new stock. Even though it's older seed, I'm adding that in. And that's how I can buffer. So the only way I can get away with growing 30 tomatillo plants is if I have something I can exchange genetics with to add different genetics in. And so that'll last me, by having 900 seeds, that'll last me probably about 4 years, right? And then by that 4th year, I better start, bringing in some either new genetics, or I better start planting 150 plants. I really have to do one or the other. So that's the one thing about it. So, all right, all right, and so the golden rule of this really is a 3 equals 1, right? 3 is 1. And so you can have 3 self-pollinating plants for the space it takes for 1 cross-pollinating plant. Meaning that you can grow 30 for 30, right? Between these two, for the space you need for the minimum to grow your corn, you can grow tomatoes, peppers, and bush beans. And so that's where the advantage lies in your self-pollinating crops, is that because you need so little to maintain their genetic diversity, you can plant multiple varieties. And so what I would recommend, and mind you, self-pollination, that is also, wheat, spelt, barley, and rice. So I should probably write that up there. Because it's good just to So from self-pollinating, you can get a grain and a legume. So last week I talked about nutrition and how much you have to eat for your calories. I talked about males need about 1 pound of grain and about a 1/2 pound of legumes a day. Females need about 0.8 pounds of grain and a half pound of legume a day to get the calories. And so with that, if you're choosing cross-pollination for everything, it's going to be a lot harder to get those requirements because you need vastly more crops. I do have a nice winter spelt growing. Oh. Yeah, erase that a little bit. You know, and I'm excited from that. I ordered it. It's called Elwha River Spelt. It was developed by Washington State University in Elwha River Valley. There's only like 4 people growing it, and it's exclusively only to Washington. So I'm trying to localize it because it's a really good landrace. The smell of the spelt is amazing. It just smells amazing. And spelt, even though the carbohydrate is a lower quality carbohydrate, it has enough fiber in it that people who have celiac disease can still eat it. And it has twice the nutritional composition that like barley does, but it doesn't have this quite as big as yield. So it's definitely more a nutrition first crop, and people with celiac can eat it. So they can still have breads made from it. But other than that, I focus all on gluten-free, just because they grow really well. And a lot of your gluten-free crops are really good against drought. And so, all right. So let's say you have, gotta wrap this up. Let's say you have a four 10 by 10 plots, right? 4 10 by 10 plots. Right, so this, having 4 10-foot by 10-foot plots would give you 5 Fimbuza planting stations. Remember, 1 station every 2 feet, right? So 10-foot by 10-foot plot. We give you 5 planting stations with 2 plants per station, and you would have 4 rows, right? So that, and then so 2.5 feet per row. Right, so 4 rows, that's 10 feet. 4 rows, 5 planting stations per row, that's 40 plants. This would allow you to plant in a 10-foot by 10-foot space, 1 cross-pollinating and 1 self-pollinating.
What were the rows again, sir?
It would be 4 rows of 10-foot long and 2.5 wide. Or 2.5 feet per row. So 1 row every 2.5 foot. It's the Fimbuza that we went over. Yeah, so it's that. I'm just breaking it down to a 10-foot by 10-foot space. So it's 2.5 per row, and each planting station is 2 feet long. A total of 10 feet, 10 feet. And so that will allow you to have 1 cross-pollination and 1 self-pollination. Or it would allow you to have 4 self-pollinating crops. If you were to choose squash, you need more space. Any vining crop, you need more space, unless you choose the dwarf varieties. They have dwarf. Burpees sells dwarf butternut squash. You can get an acorn squash. Acorn squash is it's in the same family as your summer squash, so it'll crossbreed. But you can grow summer squash or acorn squash, spaghetti squash, delicata squash. All these are bush varieties. They have bush cucumbers, they have bush watermelons. Any vining crop, if you put bush in front of it, there's always a cultivar that they have someone selling that is compact. And so you can still do this method with your vining crops and have genetic diversity. You just have to pick the right seed to start with. So if you had a space in full sun, you could do corn and beans, because corn and beans are a companion crop. That would be 10 plants for beans and 30 plants for corn, and that makes up the 40 plants on this plot, on the 40 station plot. So corn and beans do well together, and that would be a nice setup. let's say I had a partially shaded plot that I could do 2 plants in full sun, 1 in partial sun, and 1 in quarter sun, right? So think about you have an opening, part of it's in the opening, and then you have trees on the back end. So as evening comes, the trees start to overshadow your property, right? So you have a noon sun, a morning to noon sun, and then it starts to go into trees, right? So if you have something like that, you could do a, so 2 weeks ago I talked about a vegetable bed, with a 6-foot long vegetable bed in Famvutsa. And mind you, I have all this, it's all online. You can go back and reference the training. And so all of it's online on YouTube. And so if you do the 6-foot vegetable plot, which is a total of 6 foot, 42 inches for the, it's 5 foot, 42 inches for the plot itself, and then 18 inches for the pathway. The first row of this station, you can plant tomato, and they would be in full sun. The next companion plant would be a crossing plant, and it would take up, it would be a 3-row system. So we would do the 5-foot long vegetable bed and 3 rows. And again, that information on the measurements was from the first week, and that is online. If you look up Generational Gardening on YouTube, all these trainings will be up there. You can watch them whenever you want, including last week's. And so on the first row of the 3-row plot, you would do tomato, and then the next 2 rows, you could do carrots, and that's a companion to tomatoes. And it's small enough to fit 30 plants on 2 rows. Next, the next plant you could do would be a standard row, Famvutsa row, and it would be peas, and that needs half sun. The carrots need half sun as well. So tomatoes take up full sun, right? And then it starts to shade out. Partial sun or half sun for the carrots. The carrots like tomatoes, the carrots like peas. Peas would be the next crop. So now we're thinking probably either a spring or a fall crop. This is a spring or fall bed. Next would be peas, which likes carrots. And they're self-pollinating, so all you need is 10. And the final one in the back would be spinach. And spinach and peas do well together. So you'd be looking at tomatoes, carrots, peas, and spinach. And all 4 of those are companions. You're planting the companions next to each other. You're layering it. And that would be a very effective way to use your space. And this is an example of a shade progression, companion planting, and within standard using what we've learned on the first day with Famvutsa. Now let's look at adding succession planting. From the Milpa, we talked about last week how on a 1/10 of an acre they can grow enough food for an acre on a 1/10 of an acre by interplanting and rotation planting. And so we're going to use a full sun, except for the final row. I'm going to make the final row half sun, right? So it's mostly full sun. At the very end of the day, the shade cuts off that back a little bit. And so the corn will be the first 3 rows, and peas will be the last row. That's the first way to put it. When the corn is drying, so you're talking, August, September, right? Break the stalk and plant, and then 2 weeks before you break the stalk, when the plant's starting to dry, it's passing its milk stage, the plant is starting to yellow, you plant semi-runner beans or cowpeas. Okay? Those are semi-vining. And so you would plant that, and after 2 weeks you'd break the stalk and bend it down, creating an upside down V shape. And what that will do is allow the beans to trellis, the semi-runner beans, to trellis, and then the corn stalks will no longer overshade the beans. And that is a milpa system they use down in Guatemala. And then by breaking the stalk of the corn, you're killing the plant. And now the roots are no longer in competition for resources. And then by that time, the peas will be done. and you can just plant carrots on the back half. And so, and that will get shade from the corn stalks, because pea plants are tiny, and so they don't need much shade, so that will help shade them, as the corn stalks and vine beans will provide enough shade for them, because they'll be about 3 feet tall, 3 to 4 feet tall. So that's a method of how to use companion planting to start off your season strong. You know, you're doing corn, you're doing peas, or corn and peas, yeah. And then you are switching it over when the crops are done. During the summertime, you're switching over, you're planting a bean crop or a cowpea crop to finish out the year. And then the back row, you're planting carrots for a harvest. And you're allowed to plant these in like September or August. I would say August, mid-August, you can plant these. You have a decent amount of time. Last week I gave all the dates and everything for every crop that I'm using for examples. And then and that's an example of the first plot. The second plot will be a 5-row veggie row. We talked about that the first week. Okay, so where you're talking about very small crops. And then the back row is a standard 2-row system. From Guza's system, a standard 2-row. This will be a half sun to quarter sun. So you're talking about super shaded, not much sunlight, back corner of the property. You're going to start off the year planting all 5 rows of the front of the first half with radish, because you can plant it while it's still cold outside. You can plant that actually March 18th. And so it's about a month before you can harvest it. So you can harvest it right as the final freeze happens for the year. You can harvest the radish. And then the back 2, you plant spinach, which also has the same harvest date. And so while it's still freezing outside and below freezing, you can plant spinach and radish, and you can harvest it as soon as April 15th starts, okay, when you're ready to actually start planting your normal crops, okay? And those 2 go together. And then you keep the first 2 rows of your 5 rows of radish. You keep those for seed. And the next 3 rows of that first half, you plant chard. And that Swiss chard will give you veggies, nice leafy greens for the rest of the year. Let the radish bolt in the first 2 rows to produce seed. And that'll be, because radish is cross-pollinating, right? But because they're 8 inches per plant, the first 2 rows you can have enough there to have your 30 plant minimum. And so, and then when the radish are finished producing seeds, plant when the carrots are done, whoa, I'm confused myself, give me a second. All right, so you harvest the 3 rows, harvest 3, keep radish in 2, plant chard in 2 rows, plant carrots in the last and 5th row of the 5-row system. So it starts with all radish, then you harvest 3 rows, 2 rows chard, 1 row carrots. Let the radish bolt and produce seeds. When the carrots are finished, you can pull them and plant chard. So you'll end up with 2 rows of radish and 3 rows of chard. 1's delayed, right? And then when the radish is done, you can pull them when they produce the seed, and you harvest the seed. You can plant peas there in the front 2 rows. Okay? And then the spinach, after you harvested the spinach in the back, you can replace it with lettuce, or you can keep the spinach there, or replant it if it died from the heat, and for a seed crop the following year. A lot going on there.
So the spinach will regrow without it without a seed? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I would say grow the spinach from seed, harvest it, eat it. Don't use all your seed. Then later that year, because it has a hard time through the summer, and for seed it's a biennial. And so what you want to do is you want to overwinter it, and so by planting it again later in fall or closer to fall, you allow it to produce another crop, but don't pick the whole plant out. Just pick some leaves and let it overwinter, and then it'll produce seed. I don't use spinach. I use Ethiopian kale. And the reason I use Ethiopian kale is because it's annual. I can plant it in spring, and it will produce a crop, and I can let it sit there, and it'll produce seed for me in the summertime.
How does that taste? Is it like spinach or?
Yeah, it's like kale. It's some people say it can be a little bit spicy, but it's like yeah. But a lot of people say it just tastes like regular kale, and so it's just a leafy green that, that's one I really don't like biennials. I'm sorry, no offense to anyone who loves biennials. I try to avoid biennials because I want plants to be done that first year. I want to get seed every year. It's just harder for, it's harder when you have to, it's harder to breed plants when you have to wait a few years. Like the people who breed asparagus, my heart goes out to them because that's like a 2 to 4 year breed cycle. You have to wait, 2 to 4 years just to get seed. So from asparagus, it takes 3 years just to develop and to root itself in the ground. And so I want to make sure that my plants are adapting that first year. And I'll make sure they're doing good. So I choose Ethiopian kale, amaranth, molokia, and aurak. Those are the 4 greens plants that I go with. And so I have them in red leaf varieties and green leaf varieties for the nutrition. And so I wish I could have a cabbage that would. I love cabbage. I love collard greens. But they're biennials. I just don't want to. I guess I could plant them in fall and overwinter them. But I do that with my spelt. My spelt I overwinter. I call it like an abundance crop. Because when you harvest your food, you have all this food, and so you just take some of it and you go ahead and plant it ahead of time. So that's why I do the spelt, because the spelt it's going to overwinter, it's going to act as a ground cover, and it's going to outcompete the weeds first thing in the spring. And so, did everyone get that system, that last little bit? All right, this is it. The last little bit. This is it. Prairie paradise. All right. Now, the pathways between your plots, your little plot systems, I would recommend mowing, right? Just getting a lawnmower and just mowing it down, right? Turf grass can ruin your day. Now, if you have amazing garden soil and you don't have, grass and stuff in between, right? And you mulch in between the rows, that's amazing also. Remember, we want a year-long mulching, right? If you're going to green mulch, and you're having plants there, make sure the plants are cut down low. And so you want to keep the other plants down from overcrowding. I lost my entire bean crop this year, my bush beans, and most of my cowpeas, and my chickpeas because turf grass got out of control. And so a lot of your smaller, now cowpeas did a decent job. Pole beans will outcompete turf grass. So if you have an area that has a little problem, you can't get the mower by it, or you can plant pole beans and they will do good. Your pole beans will do good because they grow tall and they won't get overshaded by the grass. And so that's one thing I noticed. Okay, turf grass can make your day bad. One method of intercropping for the milpa system is utilizing native plants. We talked about how it's used to create a forest. And so the plants of the prairie are known for their organic matter production. their resilience, and for creating deep wells of water beneath the soil. The biennials, like Black-Eyed Susan or Illinois bundleflower, create a 6.5-foot long root system in the ground in 2 years, allowing rain to be stored. It's fantastic. Plants like lead plant can have up to a 20-foot long root system, giving life to microbes deep in the soil and storing up huge amounts of rainwater in the soil. It's very important. There's no biome that creates more organic matter and stores water better than a prairie system. It's been adapted to deal with harsh sun and drought and to survive. So having these plants sprinkled through your grow area can create these wells in the soil, while also creating tons of biomass for mulch and compost. You're not relying on them as food as much. These plants can be placed in the hottest parts of your yard or land, producing biomass, creating well systems, and providing, most importantly, native birds and insects with their original food source, leaving your food alone. So a lot of our native insects and bird populations, they're used to picking at the seeds or eating the plant matter of the native plants. By adding those native plants, and I noticed this in my own yard, that a lot of the beetles ate the quote-unquote weeds first before they turned on my amaranth and my beans. And so by giving the insect population its original food source back and allowing it to be there, they're going to eat that first, leaving your crops alone, giving time for more birds to show up or other predatory insects to start eating them. So it's about a 2-week delay. Even just dedicating a single row, one 10-foot row, or 2 for biennial prairie plants will help water retention, aeration of the soil, and help prevent erosion. Remember, to be a good steward of the land means to utilize all the life within its boundaries, so that all life may be appreciated and loved. Say that. That's it.